topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, welcome to the Bill Martinez Show. Great to have you with us. The question that many Americans are asking, and the reason they're asking the question because they're being told something different than what reality is demonstrating to them, and that is Bidenomics. Working, not working. Well, what is your wallet telling you? Well, there's enough common sense to go around to tell us that we're being spun. And being spun hard at every turn, because what the president is telling us and what this administration is telling us is not squaring up with the reality of every month and the paycheck that we get. Sadly, we find ourselves with more month than paycheck. That's where we are. Over 60% of America is living paycheck to paycheck. We've now accumulated well over $1 trillion in credit card debt. And that is nasty, $1 trillion. I mean, think of it. I guess we can compare, if you want, $33 trillion in debt that our country just eclipsed the other day. And nary was there a shrug of the shoulders, an announcement or nothing. It's just like, well, $33 trillion. So what? Oh, boy. We have a lot to so what about that in just a moment with our next guest, because even as the president touts the success of Bidenomics, remember, he keeps saying it's working. It's working. It's like, working for who, Joe? Please help me understand. Well, the Americans are expecting the economy to get worse over the next year than they think it will improve, according to Rasmussen. Meanwhile, Biden says it's working. The reality and pain of Bidenomics is drowning out his spin about the Biden economy. Meanwhile, the president has the temerity to take a swipe at Trump's economy as part of his labor speech to union members. Well, our next guest, Dr. Michael Busler, the public policy analyst and economics professor, notes that the federal deficit is expected to nearly double this year. Dr. Busler, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Bill. As you know, it's always my pleasure to be here.
Well, we need smart guys like you, Michael, to break this down, because unfortunately, there's a dereliction of duty from the mainstream media that is dumbing down the American people and buying into this faux narrative that Biden's economy is working for America when they know darn well it's not.
So I don't know how you define working for America, but let's take a look at what is involved with Bidenomics. The first thing the president did when he got into office, excuse me, is declare war on fossil fuels. So
right.
He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. He made the permitting process more difficult. He withdrew permits to drill on federal lands. And he essentially said to the banks, don't lend to the petroleum industry because there is no future there. As a result of that, oil production dropped from 12.5 million barrels a day when he took office to 11 million barrels a day. Now, it has rebounded somewhat, but it dropped down to $11 million a day. When you decrease the supply of anything, the price is going to go up. And what happened to energy prices? They went up significantly, and that was a large contributor to inflation. What else is involved in Bidenomics? Well, he decided to increase federal spending substantially and increase the federal deficit. As you mentioned, the public debt, which is the accumulation of all deficits over time, has now exceeded over $33 trillion. President Biden has added significantly to that. He's run up approximately $6 trillion in his first 3 years. The federal government's fiscal year ends on September 30th. The deficit for this year will be about $2 trillion. Add that to the $1 trillion last year and the $3 trillion the year before, and you end up with a $6 trillion added to the public debt. That means that when you increase government spending, and it creates a deficit that leads to excess demand in the economy. And that excess demand in the economy pulls prices up. So we had inflationary impact from energy prices going up. We had an inflationary impact from excess demand in the economy. And then the Federal Reserve, and I call this shockingly irresponsible behavior. In 2021, the economy was growing at a 6% rate, yet the Federal Reserve for the entire year and well into 2022 kept interest rates near zero and kept expanding the money supply by purchasing $240 billion a month of government bonds. That also created excess demand.
Michael, hang on just a second. Let me ask you this. Like, I mean, the Federal Reserve, we're talking people that understand, monetary policy, and they should be on top of this in such a way to where they should know what's on the horizon and what to anticipate. And you're telling me that they totally ignored the signs, knowing the trajectory of the economy was going to move in a certain direction, but yet they recklessly went forward with a policy that was unsustainable.
So the goals of monetary policy are supposed to be price stability, keep inflation low, full employment, keep unemployment low, and growth in the economy. For some reason, they forgot or ignored the price stability part. And as a result of that, prices weren't stable, and they contributed, along with Bidenomics, to the excess demand in the economy. Finally, in June of 2022, the annual inflation rate had hit over 9%. Chairman Powell said, well, the economy doesn't work for anybody when prices are rising. So now price stability becomes one of our goals. They were so far behind that it had to dramatically raise interest rates. And over the next 6 months, they raised them significantly from near zero up to about 5%. They raised somewhat going into 2023, but right now the federal funds rate is between 5.25% and 5.5%. The Federal Reserve in about an hour is going to say what they're going to do with interest rates now. The popular belief is they're going to keep them constant. I think it's a big mistake. They should take them up a little bit higher to help fight this inflation problem.
Well, and the thing is, Michael, when this movement was happening, I mean, this was in light of COVID, right? So we had some disturbances in the force of supply chain. This wasn't a mystery to people, right? And they seem to ignore that reality as well.
Now, my view is that supply chain disruptions did not add significantly to inflation. While certain markets like chips and things had supply chain disruptions, by July of 2021, remember we shut the economy down in April of 2020. By July of 2021, in total, the economy was producing at the same level as before the pandemic. So while there may be some disruptions in certain markets, in the aggregate, in total, supply problems were not the supply issues rather were not the problem. It was excess demand from the federal government through their Bidenomics program and the Federal Reserve's shockingly irresponsible policy by letting interest rates stay where they were.
Well, of course, the other thing that came roaring back was because we're talking, President Biden, the Democrats, and the haters of anything that worked previously under the previous administration, anything that had Donald Trump's initials on it, they had to get rid of it. And of course, one of the major issues was Regulation Nation. It came back with a roar, didn't it?
It certainly did. President Trump, when he got into office, he said, I'm going to get rid of 2 regulations for every one that will be added. That reduction in regulations made it much easier for business to expand and grow. And although we didn't get quite the growth under the Trump administration that we'd like, we were on the verge of getting that growth in 2020 before the pandemic.
Exactly.
President Biden came into office and he said, well, the government's got to regulate everything. So we're going to add more regulations and we're going to protect the people and we're going to save the environment. We're going to add all these regulations. that tends to slow down supply. And when you slow down supply, it tends to raise prices.
Well, and there you go. I mean, let's go ahead and bring regulations back because they work so well. I mean, let's forget about the empirical evidence and what has happened time again, whether it was the Reagan years, we saw it a bit during the Bush years, certainly a lot more during Trump. And this is in spite, Michael, of the resistance that was on full display by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. It's a wonder that America even did as well as it did because of the antithetical forces and the headwinds that hit the Donald Trump economy and the American economy.
You know, Bill, and I've talked about this on your show before. If you look at the big picture here, how did the U.S. go from the birth of a nation to the largest, most powerful economy in the world in about 150 years? Other nations were hundreds, in some cases thousands of years older. How did that happen? Again, we've talked about this before. Four basic principles, in my view. We encouraged individual freedom. As long as you didn't infringe upon anybody else's rights, you can pretty much do what you wanted to do. Secondly, we encouraged individual responsibility. As long as you were physically and mentally able to take care of yourself, everybody took care of themselves. You had family, of course, helping, but everybody took care of themselves. Thirdly, we had very low rates of taxation. So you knew whatever you earned, you were going to keep most of it.
Exactly.
Tremendous incentive. And fourthly, we had a limited role for government. The government provided defense of the country, a legal system, et cetera. But in terms of business and the economy, they sort of got out of the way. So individual freedom, individual responsibility, low rates of taxation, and a limited role for government, in my view, are what allowed the country to grow as fast as it did. The Biden administration is doing exactly the opposite in all four areas. They want to limit individual freedom. They want to control the healthcare market, eventually the education market, and a bunch of other markets, limiting individual freedom. They want to replace individual responsibility with social responsibility. The government will take care of you. Don't worry about it. So social responsibility, not individual. Thirdly, they like taxes to go up because some people aren't paying, quote, their fair share. We want taxes to go up, and they're trying to raise taxes wherever possible. So they want higher rates of taxation. And fourthly, they want an enlarged role for government where the government's involved in virtually everything. So it goes against the principles that made this country great. That's why we have a lot of the inflation problem. The economy is about to likely go into recession shortly. And when you end up with a stagnant economy and still having inflation, that's a stagflation problem. We haven't seen that really since the end of the 1970s.
Exactly. Well, Michael, the government says it will take care of you until you become a burden, because we've seen that in other countries that are Marxists or socialists. You know, as Margaret Thatcher says, all's well until you run out of other people's money. And at $33 trillion, I mean, we may be getting to that point because, you know, as you and I have discussed before, maybe it's just an interest rate hike. There's some other, calamity of an international level that affects the economy. I mean, we could be in serious trouble here really quick.
Yeah, we certainly can. The public debt now exceeds $33 trillion. The economy, GDP, will be about 24 trillion. So most economists would say if you keep the public debt under 1 year's GDP, you can probably handle it. It's significantly over that, and that's causing problems. What are the problems? There are two problems. One, you have to pay interest on that debt. And when the government incurs a deficit, they sell a 10 or 20-year bond. What happens when those bonds mature and have to get paid back? They don't have the money to pay it back. They sell new bonds to pay back the old bonds. They roll over the debt.
And that's what we used to call a Ponzi scheme.
Exactly. And the problem is much of that debt was taken out when interest rates were 1.5%. Now they're 3-4%. So you're replacing that, and interest rates are going to go up. This year, interest charges will be nearly $500 billion, about $500 billion. As we continue to accumulate debt and roll it over, the interest charges are going to end up being $1 trillion a year. You have a roughly $5.5, $6 trillion budget. That's taken a big chunk out of the budget, and it's money that we can't use for something else. Let me add one more thing. With that public debt, we're stuck in a very deep hole. The first thing you do when you're stuck in a deep hole is to stop digging.
Exactly.
So what we have to do is somehow reduce this deficit and try to balance the budget. If we can't quite balance it, get the deficit down as large as possible. In the next couple of weeks, there'll probably be a lot of discussion about doing that and raising the public debt and perhaps avoiding a government shutdown.
Well, we're talking with Dr. Michael Busler, the public policy analyst and economics professor. Michael, in my humble opinion, I don't see us being able to dig ourselves out of this debt when the Democrats are in leadership and they're in charge. They just do not have the capacity. And I'm not sure even the Republicans do, because unfortunately, what has happened on the Beltway is we have a uniparty that is formed. I mean, you can't really even believe much anymore in the R or the D that precedes the name of the elected official. They seem to be focused on another agenda. I think of all things being equal, because of the potential, I just believe the incredible potential of, what are we up to? 350, 60 million Americans here. I just believe in the potential. My hope is in the American people that, given the opportunity, like we had, 2-3 years ago, we could possibly make a dent and start to dig our way out of this mess by doing GDP numbers that are reflective of the potential of the citizenry of this country. I mean, if we bear down, bring some of this manufacturing back to the country, again, become energy independent, become a net exporter of natural resources and gas and oil, Michael, I mean, we could be strong again. We could be a service to the world as we have been, because you imagine with those kind of resources, there's a lot of our former allies are gravely disappointed because they can no longer count on us and trust us because of not just Afghanistan, but all these other goofy policies that has sent them to the arms of the Russians, or, to Venezuela or some other country that is not necessarily going to think in their best interest.
Yeah, and that's the problem. The key here that you mentioned is energy independence.
Yes.
If we can get that energy independence, we'll get the price of energy down. And not only does that just doesn't mean you pay less for gasoline and heating oil, but all of the energy to power the manufacturing industry becomes less expensive. And as that happens, it puts downward pressure on price, and it will stop a lot of this inflation. And then from a geopolitical standpoint, we don't have to be reliant on anyone. And that, I think, is extremely important. We don't have to be reliant on anyone for energy, and we have enough extra that we'll be able to export some. The other thing was to keep energy prices down. President Biden tapped into the strategic oil reserve, taking about half of it. Now, at some point, we're going to have to replace that. It's going to be very expensive. Much of the oil that was in there, we bought at a negative price.
Exactly.
We didn't pay for it. It was a negative. Why was that?
It was like they paid us.
Exactly.
They paid us to store it. Exactly.
When the pandemic hit and all the economies of the world shut down, these oil tankers were full of oil, and they need to dump them, empty it, get back, and then refill again. Nobody was buying the oil. The price of oil plummeted. And at one time, it got down to minus $37 a barrel. So they would pay you $37 a barrel to take the oil. Well, Trump said, I'll take all that you'll give us. So he replenished the strategic oil reserve with oil. Not only didn't we pay for, they paid us to take. Biden emptied about half of it. And now he's got at some point, that's going to have to be replaced. And now oil is up over $90 a barrel.
Exactly.
The oil producing nations want the price to get up to $100 a barrel. So when that gets replenished, it will be extremely expensive. And without us producing energy, we have no control over what happens with the rest of the world markets. and those energy prices are going up. Already, oil's up to about $94 a barrel. If you bought gasoline in the last month or two, you're paying 50 cents, 75 cents a gallon.
National average, $4 a gallon, Michael.
It's up to $4 a gallon. Yes. And that just, people have to buy energy. Mm-hmm. You need energy. Now, you can cut down somewhat on your driving if you can, but for the most part, our lifestyle is dependent on being able to drive our car from one place to another. I saw one study a Harvard professor did. It said the greatest factor getting people out of poverty is access to an automobile so that they can drive and go where opportunity exists. With high energy prices and with automobiles, we're in the midst of a labor strike here. Automobile costs are going to go up. And with the administration pushing electric vehicles, which are much more expensive than gas powered, those prices are high. Now people can't get a car, and even if they could, they can't afford the gas, and therefore they're not able to go where opportunity may exist.
Now I want to go back to what you talked about, and that was the decision by President Biden to drain our strategic oil preserve by 50%. The timing of that is quite curious. It's beyond curious. It's obvious. Yeah. He did it for the midterms. It was a political decision. Absolutely. Now, what all Americans need to keep in mind, that strategic oil reserve is sacrosanct. That is there in case of a national emergency. God forbid we go to war. Some other, national emergency would take place to where we would need access to this fuel, not because Joe Biden needed votes or the Democratic Party needed votes. That's what they used it for. And I'll tell you, if that doesn't make you mad as hell, I don't know what else it's going to take, because we've been worked and we're being made vulnerable because of the policies of this single president. And I say to the American people, as I said early on, Michael, this is not your fault. You didn't do this. Joe Biden did this. Okay. Joe Biden, the Democrats and their policies have done this to us. And you cannot forget that at every turn, it was purposeful and it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. This has been done by design to put the American people in pain so that big government would come in and be the solution, be the savior of the very problem that they created for us.
And that's been the Democratic Party's playbook really for many, many, many years.
Exactly.
That they end up causing these problems and then bring the federal government in to solve these problems. The thing with energy, so you say, why did President Biden do this? So some reason he would argue that there's climate change. It's an existential threat and it's all caused by the use of fossil fuels and the carbon emissions. And if we don't do something to stop it today, we're going to end up not having clean air to breathe. Now,
but they've been saying this for over 20 years, Michael. It's like everything was supposed to be melted. The East and West Coast should be out in the ocean by now with all their predictions. This is all based on false theory. I mean, we've had a recent report from 1,600 scientists and Nobel Prize winners too have said that, the theories that Joe Biden and the United Nations are pushing on the world is a bunch of bunk.
And this isn't the first time this kind of thing has happened. I'm old enough to remember back in the early 1970s, the scientists got together and they concluded in 50 years, the Earth would experience an ice age. And when that ice age occurs, we're going to have all kinds of problems. Well, obviously that didn't happen. Right. Then in the 80s, there were theories. The population is growing faster than our ability to produce food. So people are going to start starving to death. Well, that didn't happen either. Mm-hmm. Now they've been on this climate change, and they're look. The reality is that the climate's been changing for thousands of years. I mean, the climate just changes.
Right.
The Biden argues it's mostly caused by the use of fossil fuels and the carbon dioxide that it spews forth. There's a lot of scientific, as you point out, opinion that says that isn't true. And now he wants to destroy the entire economy because of something that may not be true. We have to find a compromise position. And I think we were trying to do that under the Trump administration. Our carbon emissions were going down, even though our energy production was going up. So there is a compromise position here where we can reduce carbon emissions without hurting the economy, and Biden
Michael,
just doesn't want to hear it.
Help me out here. How do you compromise with stupid? I mean, hell, really, I mean that sincerely. I mean, I have a granddaughter. She's being indoctrinated. And I was talking to her, and she said she wanted to become an ecologist when she grew up. Of course, the flag went up immediately. Yeah. And I said, well, okay, so help me understand. Do you believe that climate change is man-made and man-caused? And she didn't hesitate, said right away. I said, okay. So I didn't go any further because I know that at that point, she's been well indoctrinated and gospelized by the current public school education system. And, she was not open, and it was okay. I wasn't going to be offended. She's still my granddaughter. Right. I love her. And I know at some point in her experience, she will grow up, like the rest of us, because we've all, during our our teen years and as we were growing up, we bought into some pretty silly theories, as you'll recall. Yes. But experience defines preference. And I know that eventually she'll come to the reality. But, the thing is that we need to be vigilant about where we get our information. When you have a government that is using the people's money to pay for biased reporting from scientists, and how dare these scientists sell their souls out? And I do blame them. I can't say that I don't blame. I blame them because they have made a decision to surrender their intellect in order to go along with this faux narrative so that they can continue to collect on government dollars, which is the people's tax money, to try to convince us that, that global warming is an issue.
Yeah. Bill, you bring up a real good point with our educational system. It's our tax dollars that pay for that. And as taxpayers, we should have at least some say in where our tax dollars go. With the education system, the cost to educate students keeps escalating, and their quality of the education, as measured by the test scores, keeps declining. I live in New Jersey. It costs over $20,000 a year to educate a student in New Jersey. I mean, that's more than it costs for state tuition at a college. Yeah. So something's out of whack here, and they keep asking for more funds and more resources and higher salaries, and they're simply not doing the job they're supposed to do. Equally bad is higher education. I teach at a university that was started as a liberal arts college. Mm-hmm. So as a result, they're still very liberal arts oriented. When I get some of my students, particularly the undergraduates, they're so indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking that it just baffles me. The purpose of higher education is to learn certain things, but primarily you want to teach students critical thinking skills.
Exactly.
So that they can figure things out for themselves. I tell my students, I don't do it anymore, but I used to teach a course in argument and persuasion that took a look at different points of view. Whenever I brought anything up, the liberal position, 90% of the class favored the liberal position. And I said to them, listen, you've got it. That may be what you conclude, but before you do that, you have to take a look at the other side and see what makes sense. These professors, I think, are doing, and they're my colleagues, so I hesitate to say this, but I think they're doing a tremendous disservice to the student by putting forth just one side of an argument.
Of course they are, Michael. I mean, the bottom line is that, like you said, the number one objective is to teach kids how to think, to exercise critical thinking, because that is is foundational to the advancement and the growth of Western civilization.
Yeah, what they should do is they should present both sides of an argument and then say to the student, you figure it out. What side do you think makes the most sense? And then when you go to vote, and vote for candidates that support the view that you think makes the most sense.
Well, bring your argument back to class so we can talk about it.
Exactly.
So we can debate about it, because that's the American idea. This is the American way. This is why our number one amendment of our Constitution is freedom of speech, because it advances the intellect. If wherever you take away the freedom of speech, you purposely dumb down the constituency, don't you?
That's exactly right. And in the undergraduate classes in particular, I bring up some discussion, and I say, look, what's the primary function of business? The primary function, I say to them, is to make a profit. Some people think that's the only function business should have. So I ask the students what they think, and they say, no, that's not right. Business should have a social conscience. They should be concerned with the employees that work for them. Of course, they should be concerned with what the customers want. And I say they have to do that if they're going to be profitable, but let the market decide. So if business does something and the market says, and the market doesn't buy it, then business says it's not profitable. They aren't going to make it anymore.
Exactly.
But all this equity, inclusion, and all this stuff is really counterproductive to making an efficient and growing economy.
Well, again, this is what drives me nuts. This era that we live in, it's all based on theory. Diversity, equity, inclusion, all theory. Okay. Well, how's that working out? It didn't take long, in the last couple of years. Now you're starting to see where corporate America is trying to find a way to get unhinged from it. I mean, it is a little bit of a dance, because the DEI acolytes have ingrained themselves in corporate America. So all they can do is, if they had a staff of, maybe a couple of dozen DEI agents, maybe they've cut it back to where maybe they have 3 or 4. So they're still there. They're like cockroaches that have grown another head. They just somehow can survive everything. But this is a mess. I mean, that I find ourselves here in modern America that we're willing to just let go of the empirical evidence and proven historical lessons that we've learned over the past, Michael, and surrender them to this theoretical idea that ends up costing America, whether it's Disney losing, billions of dollars, Bud Light, look at the mess they got themselves into, Target. I mean, there's such a long and growing list of, corporate America types that decided to go woke and go broke.
And it's terrible. And you're right, it is changing. I'm going through something right now. We have to hire a new faculty member. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I want to get the best quality person. I don't care what color his skin is. I don't care what gender the person is. I don't care what he identifies with. All I care about is getting the most qualified finance professor on the faculty. The university has on the search committee what they call a search advocate. Yes. And the search advocate makes sure that you're looking at all genders, make sure you're looking at all races, make sure you're looking at everything equally. I'm afraid I'm going to end up hiring somebody that checks the boxes that they want, but is not the best quality professor. And you just can't keep doing that if you're interested in turning out the best quality student. And this happens in business all the time. They have all these diversity goals. And look, I've seen the studies, and the studies say that a more diverse workforce tends to work better, is what the studies say. Diversity tends to be a good thing, and it probably is. But the thing is, when you go to hire people, you can't hire somebody just based on their skin color or their gender. You have to base hiring on the best qualifications to get the best person who will give our students the best education, and that benefits us and it benefits the student. They don't seem to see it that way.
See, what they fail to look at is leadership, Michael. Leadership sets the tone. Yes, I've gone into some organizations that are rather diverse, but it starts at top. And it isn't anything that's legislated. It's just in the personality of the leader themselves that doesn't look at people's skin color. They just look at it as, hey, are we winning or losing? Are you doing the job? I mean, it's like, when I was a kid growing up, Michael, and our little league teams, we had minorities playing, and I didn't even think about the minority. I didn't know that they were minorities until I went to college,
Exactly.
It was like, it was insane. All I cared was, hey, could you hit the ball? If I throw the ball to you, can you catch it, tag the guy out? Hey, you got the same color uniform I do. We're on the same team. Hey, it's all good. Man, I go to college and all of a sudden I'm supposed to have this different perspective because, a guy I grew up with is black. You got to be flipping kidding me.
Yeah. It's not so bad now because I'm a full professor with tenure and I'm a senior faculty member. But when I was in my junior years and before I had tenure, I had to hold my tongue.
I bet.
Whenever I remember there was a discussion back in 2010 on Obamacare, and I had what my views are. I couldn't put my views forth because they were very much in favor of even going further, socialized medicine. If I started to talk about some of the negatives with that, my wife's Canadian. I see what this socialized medicine
exactly right.
does. So I know exactly how it works, but I couldn't speak any of that. And if I did, people would look down on me and, is this the kind of guy we want on our faculty? We better not give him tenure. Even after I got tenure, when I applied for certain things, there were a lot of faculty members that just didn't approve of anything I did. And I couldn't get anything. I stopped applying for anything simply because I didn't follow what they believe things should be. I was looking for freedom, and I was looking freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and I was always looking for the highest quality person, regardless of any physical characteristics.
What do they think about the Constitution, Michael? This past weekend, we celebrated Constitution Day. I mean, is it just a worthless document to them?
It's funny. I asked them about that, and they said, well, the Constitution was written hundreds of years ago. It should be they use the word, a living document that gets changed over time as things changed. Now, there have been amendments to the Constitution, and we understand that.
Right.
But even with that, there's certain parts of the Constitution that really don't quite apply today like they used to. The right to bear arms was, something you're worried about back in the 1700s. You don't need the right to bear arms today. So
tell those families on the southern border that are being threatened every day with illegal migrants coming through their property, right?
Yeah, that whole immigration problem. I was listening this morning to Merrick Garland testifying, and the line came along the bottom. 4,000 people in El Paso, Texas, I think it was, were caught today.
Exactly.
4,000 people just today. And then they just catch them and release them into society. And now you have them all over the place. Look at New York.
Yeah. Come back in 8 years. You'll have a meeting in 8 years. I mean, you probably have scored yourself a wife along the way, or maybe you brought one with you, and she's bared 3 kids. So now we've got 3 additional citizens that we didn't bargain for in this program, and now the father or the mother is illegal. They can't pass the test, and so we're going to kick them out of the country, but their kids are going to stay here, right?
You can't kick somebody out of the country who's got 3 kids. That's just an inhumane thing to do. So they come in, they have kids. The kids are American citizens, and they think that's their ticket to staying here because nobody who has any kind of a heart would try to deport a parent. And
of course,
the kid is still here. We really need to do something as soon as possible. Really, yesterday.
I mean, this thing is, to me, there's constitutional grounds here, Michael, that the president of the United States, Mayorkas, has ignored, the #1 job of government, and that is national security, to protect its citizens. You have illegal migrants coming in who have sworn an allegiance to the cartel. In fact, they've even paid for that allegiance. And they're coming in to do the cartel's bidding, whether it's human trafficking, funneling drugs into this country. We just had yesterday a 1-year-old at a daycare center die because they came in contact with fentanyl.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrible. The amount of drugs coming across the border. And Secretary Mayorkas testifies in front of Congress, the border is secure.
Oh, my goodness.
I heard him say it 3 times on 2 different occasions. The border is secure. I wish somebody would just ask him, what's your definition of a secure border?
Exactly.
Because,
well, it's clear that, our definition and his definition of border secure are 2 different things. And like we said earlier, Michael, this isn't by accident. They're doing this on purpose. And again, I tell the American people, it's not your fault. But we have to act. We've got to put pressure on this government because something's going to give. I mean, look what's happening in New York, Michael. I mean, the people are up in arms, 8 million people, and they got 100,000 plus. Here they are bragging about, oh, we're a sanctuary city. Well, now you know what a sanctuary city looks like, and you can't even handle the massive humanity that you've invited. And now what are they doing? They're looking to the feds, well, actually looking to us as taxpayers to pay for the problem that they created.
And what about everywhere else in the country? Look at Texas. The New York was worried about 100,000 people. Texas must have 1 million people or more coming through there that they have to do something about, and they're not really getting any help from the federal government. This is something, the border wall should have been finished. We would have been able to keep illegal migrants out. Look, this country was formed with immigrants. My parents were immigrants, but they came into the country legally.
Yes.
The U.S. allows over 1 million people to come into the country legally. That's more than every other country in the world combined.
Exactly.
So we're very welcoming, but we have to limit it.
Yeah.
There's only so
Michael,
many.
let me ask you this. You bring up a good point. We have 1 million people every year. They're allowed to come into the country legally. They are sponsored so that they're not any liability whatsoever to taxpayer. What a novel concept, right? And they're probably thinking, my gosh, man, what am I doing? I'm coming here legally. Maybe I had to do an end run like everybody else. And I get free Medicare. I get, free medical. I get free education and everything. That's better. I come in legally because here they come in and they're looking for a job. Well, guess what? The illegal migrants are taking up those jobs that they would have gotten.
Yeah, and that kind of thing is going to be worse because these people are going to try to work somewhere. I think the government is even, I don't know whether they started giving work permits to some of them. I know some of the Democrats have been advocating that. It's not a problem now. The unemployment rate is low, and actually more job openings are unemployed people. But things are going to change in the very near future, and these migrants are willing to work for a lot less money than Americans are. And it's going to
they'll work under the table. That's the other thing that's shameful, and it's shameful that the businesses will pay an illegal migrant under the table. They're not helping the cause for America here. They're contributing to the problem, Michael.
Yeah, they are. Unfortunately, they say, look, I live in a seashore town, and it's hard to get people to work in some of these in the hospitality industry. There are illegal immigrants there, and the business people tell me I can't get anybody else at any wage.
Yeah, but pay them a fair wage that is commensurate with anybody else that would be a citizen. Don't go on the cheap. Okay. And when you take advantage of people like that, it's not right for them individually. And plus on, when things turn around and you go to hire somebody, now you're hiring them based on an unlivable wage. People can't live on $15, $20 an hour. That's ridiculous what the Biden administration and Bidenomics has done, Michael.
Yeah. Unfortunately, some of these businesses say to me, look, I can't get anybody. And if I can't get anybody, my business is going to shut down. The only ones I can get are illegal immigrants. And I'm now forced to break the law because I have to pay them under the table. But my survival depends on it. So we've created a very difficult, bad situation. The sooner we can get to fixing this, the better. The problem is the Biden administration just continues to ignore it. And as I said, 4,000 people I saw on TV came across in El Paso, Texas just today.
Well, what are we talking? His administration, somewhere estimated 5 to 7 million illegals.
That's what I've seen, about
across
6
the border,
million,
something like that.
That I've seen.
It's a huge number. And like you said, like anything, the longer you wait to fix the problem, the more complicated it becomes. Just like we were talking about, 8 years later, we got 2, 3 anchor babies that are now involved in the situation. You've got people who are beholden to the cartels. They're well entrenched in the business of the cartel industry within the supply chains throughout this country. Well, I was looking at a map here recently, Michael, and it showed where the cartels, where their tentacles have moved into just about every state of the union. I mean, think about that. Sex trafficking. That was the other thing too. That I was reading an article here that what's happening is this really says about the type of person who's coming into the country, sadly, is that people are being sent into the country. Parents are sending their daughters into the country, knowing they're going to be sex trafficked, with this hope that once they get into America, they will be the hook and the string that will draw them into the country, because then they will be sponsored by their daughter, who is being used in human sex trafficking. And if that daughter lives long enough to be able to do that, the parents are so desperate and they're so amoral to do that to their own children, because to think that, they could likely be dead by the time you become a citizen of the United States, somehow that makes sense, that in their world. To me, I think that is, you got to be morally bankrupt to think that.
Yeah, and the Democrats say, well, look, these are poor people. They really need help. They're living in very difficult situations. We should let them all in. Look, I'm very sympathetic to all those people too.
Right.
But there are people all over the world like that.
Exactly.
And
there's ways to help them without compromising, the goose that's laying golden eggs here. That's a simple answer, is saying, oh yeah, we'll just let him in here. That's a simple, but that's not the right solution. Why do you want them to leave, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 8,000 miles away from home to come here to the United States when their culture and everything that they're familiar with is 8,000 miles away, Michael?
Yeah, look, we're sympathetic to whatever problems they have, but it looks like the people that are coming in are not just people from South America that are in difficult situations. We're getting people from all over the world.
Exactly.
Russians and Chinese and Afghanistan, and all these people are coming and say, hey, you just have to get to Mexico and you can walk into the U.S. and they'll let you come in.
And the Democrats are happy to let them in and go, wait a minute, we just remembered 9/11. It took 19 people to do all the damage they did in 2001. And we know at least there's been over 200 known terrorists on the watch list. We're not even counting the gotaways. We don't even know who they are and what they're all about. But we've got 200 Manchurian candidates, so to speak, that are, to the ready to do some serious damage on our country.
I hope the American public really wakes up to all this by the next election. We can't afford to have Biden and the Democratic policies go another 4 years. It will destroy the country. I wrote a column when Biden first got into office. I said, if he implements all of these policies, it will destroy the country. He's implementing them, and it is destroying the country. I hope Americans, when they go to vote, look away from the Democratic Party and look towards some of the more sensible positions of the Republican Party, because 4 more years of this kind of philosophy and these policies will really wreak havoc with the country. We talk about these migrants. Well, a lot of these migrants are children. So now they have to be put into schools. Some of them don't speak English. So now you're going to hurt the American students who have these immigrants in their
they're going
class.
to go further. They're going to go further down the list in terms of how well the educational system is doing, because this is impossible. You're putting an incredible amount of additional weight on public school teachers that are already they're already overwhelmed with what they're dealing with right now, Michael, to your point. Michael, we got to leave it there. As always, I cannot thank you enough for, coming on the show and being able to exercise critical thinking and also to exercise our number one amendment, our First Amendment of our Constitution, freedom of speech. Thank you, Michael, for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Bill. It's always my pleasure. Look forward to doing it again.
You got it, always. Our thanks to Dr. Michael Busler for being with us today. For more information and to be a part of this mighty movement to return to God and to save our country, check it out, BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a great day.